Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and I'm going to be joined by my friend and teammate Veiled Shot, who runs the channel Veiled Shot Diablo 4 that you would definitely want to check out, and I'll link down below. Been crushing it with content recently. We're going to talk about our thoughts now post-launch. Now that we have had a chance to really dive in and sink our teeth into the live game and theorycraft a bunch of different things and actually play the real thing, let's get into it. Alrighty, how we doing today, Veiled?
Pretty good, pretty good. Going through, what is it? We're on to day 5 now, technically. Just continuing the
Dude,
grind.
it's
And
it's it's a blur, man. Like it's been like the first 2 days. You can attest to this. I probably the first 48 hours, I probably slept like 3.5 hours, and you were
mhm.
probably something similar, right?
Yeah, I was up like 36 hours when I first went to bed. I went to bed for like I took a nap for 2.5 hours. Then I was up and at it again. Then the second time I slept for about 3.5, 4 hours. And then I was back to it. But the last 2 days, I got like a normal amount of sleep, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the last like 2.5 days, I've tried to be a little bit more normal as well. But yeah, so I guess we'll just go left to right. We've got like the different icons on here: Barb, Druid, Necro, Rogue, and Sork right there. It looks like they're in alphabetical order. Okay, yeah. So Barbarian, we've got the different tiers here. We've got OP, which means like they probably need to be nerfed. We've got S, which means they're awesome. We've got A, which means they're just decently balanced. B means they're underperforming. And then C means they are just awful and they're going to definitely need a buff soon. So, what are we thinking for Barbarian? I'll let you go ahead and rank the first one and then I'll give you my thoughts.
I don't know if any class really deserves the OP category yet anymore. If it was this before the changes, I'd probably put Barbarian up there. But I think Barbarian's good, but they're all the classes are so squishy still, even with the Barbarian having so much damage reduction. So I probably go with A tier still. Not only that, but also they only really have one extremely viable build, and the other ones are far worse.
Yeah, and that's we do definitely need to see some build balancing. That's almost the case for every class. I'm like,
Every
yeah,
class.
they've got like that one style that is just completely outshining everything else. Which, to be fair, I mean, every game is gonna have some sort of a meta, especially when they haven't had time to really crunch a bunch of data. But A, like the thing is, I'm high A, low S on Barb. I think it's I almost think it's an advantage to have a melee class right now, because the way the game is designed, even as a sorcerer, you end up melee all the damn time. So just like the way we play, you're not really sitting at range because of all the different mechanics with like the immunity bubbles, and you have to really get in there. So it's kind of like the opposite problem we've seen on things like Diablo Immortal, where range is so supreme. So I would almost personally go S on Barb just for that reason, but I'm okay with high A as well. So for Druid, you know what? I'm actually gonna let you take this one because I think you're gonna know more than me. Druid's the one I know the least about, so I'm gonna let you go ahead and start off on Druid.
All right. Assuming this is like for end game later on in the game, because Druid is still pretty bad earlier on. We're gonna have Druid here at, I would put it in A tier, right behind the Barb. The difference between the Druid and the Barbarian is the Barbarian is like consistently critting over and over and over again, and annihilating everything with Whirlwind, right? And they have lower cooldowns. Whereas the Druid feels like it's kind of like almost like a One Punch Man. You know, you go in there, you got one big hit, two big hits, three big hits maybe, and then you're kind of just charging up again and waiting for you to get it back in there. Granted, that falls off later, meaning that you can mitigate that a little bit, but still, it's not what Barb does, which just spin, spin, spin. And if you can keep that up, then yeah, it's going to be really insane. And so I think that Druid oftentimes ends up in the A tier because they're also not quite like a melee class. Like their playstyle is more of a range class, which ends up being a little bit awkward for the Druid, I would say.
Yeah, they're like the most clunky class is like a word I can think of, but they can definitely be insane. I would say maybe end game they would slide into S. early game, they would be like B. So yeah, I'm kind of right with you there on kind of like right behind the barbarian. So necro. I was thinking for this to be my second class after maining sorcerer. I'm probably gonna go like high B on necro. I think they can be pretty tanky and they've got some fun things in their arsenal, but the summons are falling off fast and dying a little bit too often still once you get towards the end game. So I don't know that they can really keep up with some of the other options. So how would you feel on that? I have no clue what you're going to say, by the
Ooh,
way. We haven't talked
this is
about
a
this
hot
before.
take. This is a hot take. You ready for this? F tier. They're straight up F tier. If you're talking end
Really? So
game,
you're gonna put
they're
Necro at the bottom. Okay, we'll slide them down.
at the very bottom. I would put them at the very. Here's the just. I'm gonna be like straight with. I'm gonna put a category or at least a class in every tier. At least that's how I would personally do it because if you're gonna have like 3 C tiers or whatever, I don't like that as much. But if I were to clearly distinguish the worst class in the end game, I'd definitely put Necro there. And the main reason for this is the fact that the only thing they're really getting if you're solo endgame is a little bit of damage from Bone Spear. They do solid damage, but by that time, permanent vulnerable uptime is not anything unique about the class. Their damage is not anything special. In fact, their damage is lower than the Sorcerer and Rogue, which is higher than the Barb and Druid early, but on the end game, it's the worst now. And on top of that, they don't have any way to move around. And as I've seen in this game, that is perhaps the most important thing oftentimes in these games, or in this game, where you have to jump into suppressors to kill them really quickly, or jump onto a champion. Otherwise, if you don't kill that champion, suddenly the whole team is not taking any damage. Or you just have to avoid like electric pillars shooting you with lasers, or some sort of area effect that's hitting you. And in Nightmare Dungeons, as the affixes go higher and higher in terms of the amount you have to deal with, you start to really want to be able to move around. And if I were to say, let's say maybe Necro is still fine in terms of yes, it can complete content. So maybe like if this was like a D tier, that's probably what I would say. But more so than that, it's just the worst class. So if it's the worst class, I'm gonna put it in the worst tier.
Yeah, and you make a good point about the mobility. Mobility in these games is just everything. I mean, in almost every game, mobility is everything. So yeah, they definitely need some sort of a blood rush type of ability they had in Diablo 3. They need some sort of way to traverse the map more effectively because it's such a cool class, but they're missing a little bit. I wouldn't have gone quite that bad, but I can't really disagree with anything you said. Now I'm gonna go ahead and let you take Rogue because that's your main. So, and then I'll take Sork at the end. So go ahead and kick off Rogue.
So Rogue for me, in solo play, ooh, the problem with Rogue right now is they're
I
abusing.
already disagree.
At least
The
I'm
problem with
abusing.
Rogue, okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. The problem, no, this is a good thing for the Rogue. The problem with Rogue is that they're relying right now on a specific legendary item that, in my opinion, the class works the best with, and that is temerity and traps. And in general, Rogue, more so than any other class, has arguably the best way to have some sort of healing, and that's close range. If you crit strike, you're going to heal for 3% of your maximum life. If you're on an AoE, you could heal for easily like 30% of your maximum life per skill. And if you spam it out, obviously you're healing to max every single time. With Temerity, you have permanent tankiness, which means that the problem with Rogue, which is the squishy aspect of it, which does end up taking place later on, is completely mitigated. And so with that mitigated, you end up with a really decent damaging class, not quite as much as Barb, not quite as much as Druid, but also with the mobility, with the really high tankiness, and with the really high healing. So I would say like definitely high B, maybe low A. I do think they're a step down from Druid and Barb. Just warning, Nightmare Dungeons with like DM and Kyre, who are playing a Druid and Barb. I will go in there and I'll be the tank of the team. How crazy is this? I'll be the tank of the team, and the Druid and Barb are killing the enemies. So I would say probably high B, low A.
Okay, that's a hot take for sure. I can't go B on the Rogue. I can't do it. If we're doing like an overall tier list, I have to put Rogue in S Now, if you want to compare like level 50 plus nightmare dungeons, okay, I think you're making good points. And Veiled, I know you're playing at at that level of level 50 plus on the nightmare dungeons, but gosh, overall, I gotta go Rogue and S. They're just always bursting everything down with so much mobility and such a consistent play style. I just can't keep up with them on Sorcerer. Doesn't matter how glass cannon I go. So, okay, point taken. But I'm gonna go with S, just like in the overall grand scheme of the game. Is that fair or?
I don't even. So here's what the overall. I've changed my perspective a little bit on the overall game. So if you consider the overall game, you have the one. I break it up into like four parts essentially. You have the 1 to 50, which is like the campaign early leveling process. You have the 50 to 70, which is like the mid game leveling process. Then you have the 70 to 100, which is the like end game leveling process. And then you have nightmare dungeons. Barb and Druid actually can potentially, well, specifically Barb, not Druid, oftentimes can actually out farm the Rogue at 70 to 100 if you get the build rolling, which is very easy to do. But up until that point, Rogue outclasses everyone. They're definitely S tier up until 70. At that point, Rogue starts to, or Barbarian starts to surpass them. And then when you get to Nightmare Dungeons and later, like on to the level 100, Druid starts to surpass Rogue. So for me, if you're going overall, I'd probably put them still under Barbarian at least, but maybe above Druid.
Okay, gotcha. Well, we'll do that then. And you said you wanted different tiers, so we'll go Barb S, and then Rogue A. Well, we can't put in all five, but okay. Anyway, I'll go into Sork, and then we'll fine tune here at the end. So, Sorcerer. The problem with Sorcerer is some of the builds, like your Hydra, your Firewall, stuff like that. The casting time is just too long. You can't like machine gun firewalls all over the map. So you're sitting there like a clunky, like, oh, I'm gonna drop a firewall, and then 2 seconds later, I'm gonna drop another firewall, and by then your team's like, dude, what are you doing? Like we're moving on. So really, your only option to like machine gun is gonna be like chain lightning or your ice shards, your stuff like that, and the tankiness ends up being a little bit of an issue. Temerity helps, the pants that you describe, but I never really feel like I can keep up with like the rogue that I'm playing with, and I can't really get in there as effectively as a druid and a barb. So I'd probably go like B on the sorcerer.
Yeah, I would say I personally agree with B. I think that you have one advantage over the other classes above you, and that is that your favorite build or your best build is kind of purely ranged for the most part. Um, and so that is in some scenarios an advantage, but as you say, I think that the way you get damage out, or like the fact that you kind of have to jump in if you want to use like Frost Nova or teleport, and you do have to kind of challenge those champions, or even the fact that your mobility skills are just worse than the rogue, you move slower than the barb, and you just do less damage than both. Yeah, B tier is probably where I would go. Still solid, just not amazing.
Yeah, because the range is great, but when you're lane farming, you can't just sit at range. Like you have to be up in there. You have to dive on the shaman. You have to dive into those bubbles. You can't just sit at range. So it ends up really, I don't know. Should they adjust some of those mechanics, because it makes range classes like forced. You have to jump in there.
Yeah, I think the way you fix it is you give the shield a health bar and make it like, I don't know, 25% of the elite health bar or 50% or whatever, and you can actually kill it. That may be for ranged, or maybe they just, I don't know, something to do with the ability for ranged characters to actually interact with that. Because if you don't have anything to get inside the bubble, you're just screwed.
Yeah, I really like that idea. That's a good, it's kind of like a May wall in Overwatch. You can shoot it and get through it. Yeah, I like that. That would be a good way to go about it. We've already seen Blizzard do that with the May wall in Overwatch. So okay, on my screen, I've got Barb on S, then I've got Rogue, then Druid on A, and then the Sorcerer on B, and the Necro in the bottom tier at C. Is there anything we should change? No one's OP. What would Barb have been qualified as OP before they adjusted the Whirlwind build?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They're just they're S tier, or they're, in my opinion, whatever tier you have them at on any list. they are the best. Okay, that's where I would put them. And so if they are the best and you've nerfed their strongest build by perhaps more than half, so where you can't infinitely stack, you've nerfed the crit chance on it massively, you've nerfed the damage numbers, you've nerfed the movement speed, you've nerfed the shouts, you literally nerfed everything that you could possibly nerf on the build, and yet it's still blasting through dungeons. Yeah, I think that barb was definitely a little too strong earlier on in the review build and before the nerfs. So probably a good idea that Blizzard went through with the nerfs.
Alrighty, well then, in terms of ranking them, right now it is Barbarian, Rogue, Druid, Sorcerer, Necro. And then last thing I'll ask you is, if Blizzard came to you with balance suggestions, do you have any quick couple, like for this class, something that you personally would do if you were in charge?
The few things that I had to say is that survivability is king in this game later on. Early on, obviously, you care about damage, you want to farm fast, but later on, when we consider a lot of the like S tier stuff, we're looking at pushing, and every class has a problem surviving, every single one. In the like tier 100, tier 90 plus, tier 80 plus, even 70 plus. But hitting survivability on some of these classes is going to be pretty massive. But then also, especially for the sorcerer and necromancer, giving them some options from their ranged toolkits, or potentially giving more mobility to the necro, or potentially just straight up like faster animations, or potentially more AoE for the sorcerer, because I've noticed that that actually ends up being lackluster with the certain skills that do AoE. So I don't know. There's a few options that I would suggest, but to be honest, we haven't really dove into tier 100 nightmare dungeons across the board. So I don't even know if every class can do them at this point. My guess is that it's going to be very difficult, if impossible, for some of those classes. So
Yep, and I agree with all that. I think they could do it with some simple adjustments to some of the affixes and some of the bubbles and immunities, and some things that actually make stuff viable. And so you were talking earlier about like how the healing was so impactful for your rogue. And I remember I wanted to bring up one thing. It doesn't really seem to matter. Like you either get one shot or like you're okay. There doesn't really seem to be like this, oh, I need to really heal through this. It's like you either get popped by something and you fall over, or you're fine. So I was gonna ask you that. I was gonna ask you about that. I remember you talking about that with the rogue.
yeah, I agree with you, and that's why the temerity plus the healing combo is so important, because temerity gives you that 76% extra life. And for my build, I've stacked maximum life, like on my gear, on my rubies. I've gone and actually gotten a ton of life. And so what happens is I have like 10k life, mass armor. Actually, I think I have 11k life now, and then I get 76% additional life as a barrier. So I have 17k life plus the armor that's stacking. And the way it works is I heal based off my maximum life. So what ends up happening is, yes, they one shot me, but yeah, that's only half my HP bar technically, because I have additional HP bar and shields, and then I instantly heal, 70% immediately after. So I can't really get one shot because I'm healing every millisecond. I'm healing for 3% of my max HP. Basically, it's
Yeah,
absolutely insane.
and that's a
So
lot different than my sorcerer and what I'm able to kind of do right now. Okay, cool. Well, is there anything that you'd like to throw in there on the way out? Anything that you're up to over on your channel? Anything on your mind in general in Diablo 4 right now before I let you go?
just continuing the grind of 100. I was trying to do the pinnacle boss, guys. I got absolutely scammed. They disabled it. I didn't even know they disabled it. And so I went to go fight it, and I couldn't even fight it. How tragic is that? You're trying to play the game, Blizzard just scams you out there. Yeah. I had to complain about that
That's
just a little bit.
we're all in a pre-season, and this is kind of like the big full public testing phase, honestly, before the game like actually releases for season 1 towards the end of July. But yeah, thanks, Veiled. I'm gonna link to Veiled Shot's channel down below. He is cranking out some of the best Diablo 4 content on the web, so definitely click on that and go support Veiled Shot. I appreciate you taking the time to join me, man. Have a good one.
Peace.